from our studios here in Sierra Vista. Time for another Meet the Candidate edition. Tonight, we meet Kathleen Gomez, candidate for Cochise County Board of Supervisors, District 2. Kathleen, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I want to remind folks that this video is paid for by Kathleen Gomez for District 2 Supervisor, Cochise County, Arizona, because Kathleen wants to get the word out so that you understand a little bit more about who she is. First of all, what is District 2? Can you explain the various cities in District 2?
Well, District 2 is pretty big. It's not as big as District 3, but it encompasses the Sierra Vista Estates, Moson, Greater San Pedro area. Also, it is Naco, Bisbee, Douglas, Porterville, McNeil, Frida, Tombstone, and all the way over to the New Mexican border. Portal is part of District 2 too.
All right. Who is Kathleen Gomez? Give us a little mini bio.
Okay. So Kathleen Gomez is fourth generation, born and raised in Douglas. My great-grandfather came to the area, Porterville area, in about the 1880s. He died in 1928 and is buried in the Sacred Heart Cemetery, one of the few cemeteries that face south. And when I would ask my great-grandmother, why is he facing south, because everyone faces the rising sun, the east, she said because they wanted to look at Mexico. And then my grandfather, when my great-grandfather passed away, my grandfather had to work. So he had to quit school to take care of his siblings. And later on established Gomez Grocery in Porterville, Arizona. And Gomez Grocery was the hub of the community. He supported all the Mexican-American workers that worked at the smelter. And he became like the official mayor of the community. Anybody who wanted the Mexican vote, Mexican-American vote, came to Gomez Grocery and talked to my grandfather. And I grew up in the back of the store since I could remember, listening to the men talk politics from about 6 a.m. in the morning till about 11 at night when my grandmother would finally kick him out. My dad and my uncle were dentists. They went to school at St. Louis University, came back, and my dad was on the city council, on the school board, as well as my uncle did the same thing, and my dad was mayor of Douglas in 2008 to 2012. Now, I, as most people in Cochise County at 17, couldn't wait to get out. So I went to school in Missouri, transferred over to Washington, D.C., where I ended up working on the Hill for 3 congressional offices. One of my biggest heroines was Pat Schroeder, from moderate Democrat from Denver, Colorado. And with her, I worked for her for 5 years, and I served on the Armed Services Committee as her legislative assistant. And one thing I'm really proud of is that we did the Military Family Act in the 80s, which actually provided relocation services for families, child care, allowed women to work that were living on base, but probably the most important, and dental insurance. But probably the most important thing is we created an office in the Pentagon that actually, and assigned a 4-star general to that, to look over military family policy, because back in the 80s, no one said, they would not refer to military soldiers as having families. And there was an incident that occurred that kind of took me on that road. It's kind of a long story, but it was because the enlisted soldiers weren't getting the kind of services they need for the families that traveled all over the world with them. So after that, I moved to New York City, which had always been a dream of mine. Lived there for 20 years. I worked for several trade associations. I worked on Wall Street. I ran for the school board, was on the school board for PS 116, where it was the whole Upper East Side, and served on that for a long time. Was very interested in trying to work with people who were against teaching to the test, and also got involved in smaller class sizes. That involvement, being on the PTA and the school board, I ended up working for the Hispanic Federation as director for New Yorkers for smaller class sizes. There I was really excited because I actually trained students how to become advocates. And we went to Albany, where it was really great because in New York you have everything. So I had the little Irish girl, Jamaican, Mexican-American kid, Ukrainian, and on down the line. And they all went to talk to their leaders about wanting PE and art and music and just the ability to run around instead of being so focused on taking these tests. So at that point in time, and I actually ran a small business in New York City with my ex. When I got divorced, my dad was running for mayor. I decided, my kids just forgave me recently because they were about 5 and 12 years old. I brought them to Douglas and ended up working for Southeast Arizona Medical Center, which was at one time the county hospital. Was about 105 years old. So that is kind of who I am. I've done a lot of legislative work, worked on a lot of campaigns. Probably my biggest job, and I was a Democrat for a long time, but the party left me. Basically, I had a difference of opinion, and I would say that I was probably kicked out of the Democratic Party because I didn't agree with certain things. But the people that my peers were things like Senator Warner of Virginia, Emanuel Rahm, who was the mayor of Chicago, people who worked for the Clinton Foundation. And my biggest job with the Democrats was Director of Administration for the Democratic National Convention in 1992. And it was the only C-suite, the only time the convention, Democratic convention, actually everyone was African American except myself. And because I was Hispanic, the last name was Gomez, spoke Spanish, and a female, and I knew them all, I was hired. So it was a really great experience. That's when we elected Clinton to be president.
Interesting. Now, what do you see as one of the most important roles of Board of Supervisor?
Well, the Board of Supervisors is actually the highest elected office for the county, and their responsibilities is to oversee the budgets of all the departments in the county. And I think that, while people say, well, you don't want to micromanage, what you do want to do as a supervisor is make sure that the money is being spent as it should be. You also are in charge of county taxes, so raising property taxes or trying to, actually find money to pay for all these things. One of the things that I want to stop is increasing taxes to pay for a lot of services. We can find other ways of doing that because Cochise County is one of the highest taxes of counties taxes in most of the rest of the United States. And then it filters down. For instance, Douglas is at an 11-cent sales tax, which is just killing the economy. And so we have to be very careful. We want to provide a lot of things, but we have to really work within our means. And I think there are other ways to raise capital, not just on increasing taxes.
So what is your platform exactly?
Well, my platform, I think what I feel in all this time I've been doing it, my biggest thing is to inform people, because what I've found is that finding out information that's accurate and at the right time before the decisions are made is really crucial. Because when you find out things have already been decided, it makes you as a citizen and a voter feel like, well, what does it matter? Everybody's rubber stamping everything that happens. I think that what my purpose is to basically inform people, get them the information they need, involve them, because it's really, we work for you. Every elected officer works for the people, and so we're at your bidding. And so if I can show, because I worked on all levels of government, that it's not a huge deal. It's actually just coming and telling your story. And then once you tell your story and you become involved, you can see how the process changes. It inspires you as a constituent to stay involved and stay committed. And that's what we need to make the changes in this county, to bring, jobs, which is part of my platform. I want to help the small entrepreneur, excel. And I just had a meet and greet in McNeil where he's not young, but he's doing coffee. And he wants to eventually have a coffee house. He does it online. He's, I guess, what they call a drop salesperson, a drop business. The beans come out of Oregon, and he ships them all over the world. But he'd like to bring that here to McNeil and actually start a business. And that's what I think is going to be really our saving grace, our small entrepreneurs, and enabling them to be able to prosper.
What are some of the key issues you are concerned about?
Well, of course, water is a huge issue. With this AMA, and I'm not a great expert about it, but what I can see is that what we've done is actually put more restrictions and made it harder for the little guy who owns maybe anywhere from 20 acres to to 100 acres. He is having to deal with such high costs as far as drilling and as far as all the restrictions that are being put on him. Yet these big ag companies that come from out of state are having it easier because they have the money to drill deep and they have the money to buy up all these little small farms where people just can't do that. They can't afford to go 2,000 feet down, and they sell for a lot less than what their land is worth because they just want to get out while they can. And that to me is the saddest story. The other thing that we're not doing is Agua Prieta is about anywhere, and if you look at the population, about 150,000 are in the what they call the main area of Agua Prieta, but the outskirts, it goes anywhere to 250,000. Guess what? They draw from the Douglas Basin. So while we're conserving and putting all these restrictions on American citizens, we're not talking with Agua Prieta as far as to conserve water. One of the biggest issues in the past has been dust pollution. So one of their ways of dealing with it is to water the streets. Now, I would say good 85% of the streets are dust. And so you're talking about a huge community, a larger population than all of Cochise County. If we don't start at least trying to talk with them, then it's futile, because as I understand it, the basin flows like from south north. They have access to the same water we do, in which we're denying a lot of people to use for growing things or cattle, whatever. And we need to start that conversation. Otherwise, it's kind of, to me, doesn't make any sense.
What do you see as a major failing of the Board of Supervisors, if any, in District 2?
Okay, well, in 2010, when I came from New York, I started working for Southeast Arizona Medical Center. There were 100, at the time we closed the doors in 2012, 105 years old. Actually started as a tuberculosis hospital for those who were affected with that. And we were owed about $10 million by the federal government because of all the people we had to air vac out over the years, whether they were having babies, because we didn't have surgeons there, so we would have to air vac them to Tucson, whether they jumped over the wall or the fence and were dehydrated, broke their legs, or a lot of the situations were rollovers, where they would pack people in so tight. I remember one night 2 vans rolled over, I think kind of close to the Davis Road. We had 65 people we had to air vac, and that was at $7,000 a pop. So the cost was really straining us. Federal government would never pay us. We had to close our doors, which was a really, really terrible situation for Douglas. So, and English, one of the other things the Board of Supervisors does is they establish hospital districts. They're in charge of the health care, both mental, physical, of the county. We tried to save that hospital, and Ann English never showed up to any one of our meetings. I didn't really even understand how much role the Board of Supervisors had in health issues and dealing with hospitals until I decided to run. And that even made me more infuriated, because whether she could have saved us is not the question. You have to show up. You have to be there for the people when something as major as losing a hospital occurs. So that was one of the big failings. The other failing I think what they have is that in this quest that I've done for the past year and a half, I'm shocked how many people do not know what a Board of Supervisors does. It's the highest elected office. And they would say, what do you guys do? What does it mean? It means a lot. And so we have to do a better job of explaining to the citizens what our role is, so that they can understand if they have concerns that they should come to the Board of Supervisors and that we should meet. The other thing I think that happens is that I see a lot of rubber stamping that concerns me. And I'll give you a case in instance. There's solar farms. Let me back up, because I get really excited about and passionate about this issue. There's a comprehensive plan that every 10 years the Board of Supervisors needs to adopt, and it's required by state law. That sets your whole template. It's a template for how you're going to run the county the next 10 years. So let's take renewable resources as one of those elements. In 2014, the U of A did a study saying that Cochise County could actually support or sustain 630,000 acres of large solar farms, 780,000 of smaller solar farms. And then they're pushing very much using windmills. That was done by University of Arizona, only one study, 2014. That has actually kind of been where the county is going, to establishing more and more solar farms. There's a whole lot of issues as far as solar farms, especially this last one, which was going to be on Prince and Central, 594 acres in a floodplain. They say that there's no chance of fire, but as we all know in Cochise County, there are always wildfires. One of the most disturbing problems was when you looked at the company. Horace is a company out of England, and the project was called Dahlia. All of their paperwork, their phone number, led to a Hyatt Regency in Sugar Land, Texas. We called, we asked, do you actually rent suites? Is there offices in your hotel? And they said, no, we are a hotel, we're Hyatt Regency. So why would we ever consider a company that is going to get $140 million in federal tax incentives and their phone number goes to a hotel right there? Are these the right type of businesses? I mean, how do we know how legit they are? So the part of getting the community involved, we actually had a huge turnout of people begging the commissioners, please don't do this. This is 400 yards from my porch. The World Health Organization says that all solar farms should at least be 2 miles from the next neighbor or from people. So they came and they told their story. That night, 7 commissioners of the 7 who attended all voted no. Now, people were inspired. They had gotten involved. Now we have to take the last step, which in October 29th, they're appealing to the Board of Supervisors. And in their appeal letter, they're saying that the commissioners and the people who live here don't understand what a solar farm does. We're ignorant, therefore, that's why they should be allowed to do it. So, you have to be involved, you have to be informed, and it inspires you to realize you can make a difference. So that is kind of what I see. I think we have to be very careful how we go forward. There's always a big rush to, get grants or, get tax incentives. But you have to be careful because there's a price to pay. And I don't think, solar farms, they never can be returned to the natural habitat. There's a lot of other issues as far as Cochise County has a policy of let it burn. So you're talking about, I can't tell you, supposedly each acre can support 2,000 panels. If you have 594 acres, you got a lot of panels burning. That's going to give out, whether or not they say they're all made in China, and they don't supposedly have this one toxic now in them, but silicone, plastic, glass, it burns in that kind of huge amount. There's going to be toxic fallout for the community, and with the winds that we have, we could even have an issue with, Mexico. So we have to be very careful.
What course of action would you pursue that is different from your predecessors?
Well, I think what we really need to do, I'm astounded by how many intelligent people that live out in the middle of nowhere, how many people are experts, whether you talk about the opt-out community or water, or you talk about food sustainability. And what I would like to do is create task force of local experts who are living that kind of life. Like, let's take opt-out community. There's issues with gray water. How do we go about doing this? I think it's a great concept. So I'd like to bring these people together so that they could address any of the issues that people in the city have or that the county have, so that we can go towards long-term sustainable solutions. And I think the only way you can do that is with the people who live in the community, bring them together. So that's, I think, what I would do differently. The other thing I think that really needs to be done is the port of entry in Douglas is a huge thing. Everything's in place, people say, but the road that is going to be built to connect the border, the port of entry, to Highway 80, and the ADOT does not have that money, $80 million in their budget, 5 years. Board of Supervisors should have been involved from day one, making sure that ADOT was going to have that in their plan so that they could start the road now. Because if we don't have that road, the federal government is not going to release the money. So everyone can say, oh, the shovels are hitting the ground. Not if we don't have the road and it's not in ADOT's budget. That's something the Board of Supervisors should do. The other thing I would like to do is, I believe, when we get this port of entry, everyone's saying it, whether I hear it in Benson and Sierra Vista, 10,000 people are going to move here. International trade is going to be booming. We need a hospital down in Douglas, especially when you're dealing with people who might get hurt with all this international trade and all the people that are moving. And I know a way in which to get it done.
You are a big history buff of
Yes.
Cochise County and Douglas, I understand. You were telling me some fascinating stories of our history before we went on camera here. What's your favorite piece of history you think most people would be surprised to know?
Well, my dad was a pilot, and I started flying with him when I was young, so I would say aviation in Douglas is unbelievable. We have the first international airport of the Americas where you would land in Douglas. There was a custom house right at the border, and then you just roll your plane and go right into Mexico. We had the first international bombing out of the Douglas International Airport. Actually, they had a glider that they would pull with mules. They went and bought a French motor to put on the glider, and it became the first airplane that was ever flown in Arizona. We were also part of the Powder Puff Derby, which was the first all-female pilot race, and they went from California to Cleveland. And Amelia Earhart was part of that race. She actually landed in Double Adobe during the women who were having tea, and they all ran out to her. She had tea with them and then came on to Douglas. But that was huge. Eleanor Roosevelt inaugurated the airport in 1932, I believe it was. And we were part of the first airmail system. Standard Airlines used to fly into BDI. I mean, it is just amazing, the history, and that's just one piece. The other thing I was talking to you about was the horse races. El Moro de Cumpas is a famous, Eduardo Llanes wrote a very famous song called El Moro de Cumpas, and you can hear that. People have told me they've heard it in China, they've heard it in Germany, and it was about the race that happened in 1957 between a horse that was owned by the Romero family, Lampago, I think it was, and then this other horse in Cumpas. And the one that was favored was the horse from Cumpas, but the one from Al Prieto won. People actually betted so much money on that some of them lost their homes. Later in the 70s, we would have races along the border where the American horse was pitted against the Mexican horse. People would line up, the Americans, on the U.S. side, the Mexicans on the Mexican side, and the horses would race one on each side right along the border. And it was incredible. And that's just a little bit. There's so much more, whether you're talking about sports or famous writers or musicians. We've had them all.
Any final thoughts here as we wrap up our interview with you today to the voters in District 2?
I think I would like to tell you that I will work really hard. I love this county. I know we have to prosper, we have to grow, but we need to do it slowly. We need to do it with very, very a strong kind of plan. And so my key is that I would inform you. Information is kind of golden, and you need it before the decisions are made. I would encourage you to get involved. I would show you and make it accessible to do that. And I think with that, you become inspired to be involved in the process. If I can do those three things, I will have done a great job. I will be always everyone says, well, I'm going to be transparent. But you can always reach me. I want to have an office in Douglas. I want to have an office in, maybe Tombstone. And I will be, it's a 40, 50, 60 hour a week job for me. I will always be there to serve you, to work very hard for you. And I ask that you hire me on November 5th because I love this place. And my roots go so far deep in it. And my heart is in it. And I want to do the best and bring all the knowledge and experience I've had on the federal level, from New York City, down here to Cochise County, and I will do the best job that I possibly can for you. Thank you.
Kathleen Gomez, candidate for District 2 Supervisor for Cochise County. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.